Anyway, look, today we have Thomas Joseph Brown with us. Quite simply, Thomas is one of the smartest, most brilliant people that I have ever met. In fact, as I made a little joke about on my Facebook page, I need an encyclopedia and a dictionary just to really begin to understand what he's telling me sometimes, because his mind is just so incredibly amazing. But what he has done is he has come up with an amazing talk for us today, and I have seen this, kind of the beginning of the slides of this, so I'm very, very excited. Thomas, why don't you introduce yourself so that people can know a little bit more about what you do and what you have been doing, what you've done and what you've been doing, so that they know a little bit more about you.
Oh, well, thank you, Venice. First of all, I'm actually honored that you asked me to be amongst some of these incredible luminaries that you've had on this series. And I'm not sure I'm worthy of that introduction you gave me. People have hands like smartest guy I ever met. I'm going, oh, shit, I got to put up with that now. Now I got to pretend like I am. I know some real smart people, and I've had some wonderful mentors through life, and been very fortunate for some of that to have rubbed off on me. So, basically right now I'm in Bali, basically pretty much just researching a variety of subjects and just trying to think out a new phase in life. I've been through a lot of different phases. In the past, I ran Borderland Sciences Research Foundation in 1985 to 1995, published the Journal of Borderland Research. So I've been exposed to a wide variety of very far out ideas, many of them conflicting, and also able to work with a lot of different inventors, philosophers, thinkers, and really start getting a feeling of the uniqueness of each one. How each one almost has their own universe, the way they connect in, but yet there's common archetypal structures throughout. So my interest has really been in finding the pure form archetypal structures, sort of sifting through all the different arenas of thought, philosophy, religion, science, and see if there is a common structural element through it all, which to my satisfaction I've found, but it may not resonate with others. So everything's a personal journey. This one's mine.
And that is actually really quite an achievement, isn't it, to be able to boil everything down to an archetypal structure. And I know that you've begun to explain that to me, and I really look forward to when we have a little bit more time to sit down and really get the gist of that. But that's quite an accomplishment, Thomas. Yes.
So, I mean, basically, I look at what I'm doing as symbolic performance art. I had to find a category to put it into, so I had to make up a new one. It's really more pragmatic metaphysics.
I love that.
Really what we're going to get. I'll tell you, we'll get this overview of diverse scientific data and ideas, leading to a natural scientific approach to art, culture, and nature. Because I've looked and so much work. I mean, I've seen a couple of the speakers down here say how they were very inspired by the original magical Egypt, which I really loved, and we'll discuss some of that as we go through. But I mean, I've been reading this stuff since I was a teenager. I had Budge's Egyptian Book of the Dead when I was probably 15 or something like that. I was going through those and trying to visualize, going through the pylons and reading Evans Wentz's translation of the Book of the Dead and trying to visualize that. So I've always been trying to work out these visual paths through things. And that was before I knew about the archaeoastronomy. Certain things that pyramids aligned to true north, but then we started finding out these extremely complex I was watching that Nightingale's talk. I was going, wow. This is the total complexity that's within some of these alignments, and it's multidimensional without a doubt. But what's the reason for it? Why were they doing this? What were they connecting with? And really, that's been one of the questions in my mind is, it's not like we're just in some empty 3D space where everything goes up into nowhere and everything's made out of little electrical particles, because some guy thought that up and they smash them in machines. And everybody thinks that that's what everything's made out of. And they pop a champagne when they make higher energy things, pop out new ones, like they figured something out. I'd take a different approach to it all. So
Well, sweetie,
anyway, so
why don't we start when you're ready?
anyway,
Because
this talk's just really just a presentation of a range of ideas leading to that greater understanding. Sort of like, we say, an impressionist painting is a bunch of little dots, and you stand back and you look up close, it just looks like dots, but you stand back and you go, okay, there's some interesting ideas here to consider, you know, and so it's throwing around for people to check out for themselves and create a wider dialogue.
I have to say, when you showed it to me, it's something that really shifted my understanding, because the question that you raised, which is why did they do these things? I mean, it really is a kind of a question that looms so huge, because there was so much effort that went into the construction of these things. And really, in a very tangible sense, you are the first person to begin to answer that for me. And that's why I'm really excited about this talk. So thank you. Thank you for being part of the symposium, my love.
No, it's great. I haven't done anything like this for a while, so it's thanks for dusting me off and pulling me out of the closet.
My pleasure. Well, I will turn off my camera so that people can concentrate on you, but I'm here watching, so if you need me, just...
You and Chance, if you have any questions as we roll through, feel free.
Okay, I'll tell you what, we'll turn on our cameras if we have questions so that you can see us.
All right.
Fantastic.
Sounds good.
All right, take it away, guys. Take it away and enjoy it, guys. This is going to be amazing.
Okay, so let's go on a trip. You know, let's say want to attain knowledge of the higher reality behind this reality, such as, you know, the Gnostic pleroma. That's one I like to use. The formless creative void behind the veil, you know, home of the Gnostic aeons, the creative aeons, which, you know, gave birth to us and where we're at. So, you know, so perhaps we can transcend the subjective objective consciousness by cognizing archetypal foundations of manifestation as they express themselves in forms and energies. So, like, our brains are attenuators. You know, they limit input to allow basic functions. You know, we can't process. We find this from neurological studies. So, you know, we need to train our minds to see things in themselves as expressions of primary ideations or archetypes. That's what Steiner pointed out was the Goethean method, you know, which is based on polarity and metamorphoses, which we'll touch on a bit in this talk. So we have, you know, basically the classic Hermetic Axiom, as above, so below. But we'll look into this in a deeper sense. I mean, here we can see logarithmic spirals in galaxies and hurricanes. You know, the sacred geometry appears everywhere, you know, almost like from the Platonic realm. That, you know, to me, that's the real nature of space, not the three-dimensional coordinate system that we project or experience, but that there's this actual fundamental realm. And this gets into the concept of anamnesis, right? The remembering of something from previous existences. And some take this as perhaps a remembrance from previous lives, which I'm sure from experiential and initiatory processes that this would be true. But also, I think it means that there's like a pure realm from whence we came. You know, what, you know, like to say, well, when a baby's born, is it born as a clean slate, or is there some underlying something there? And in that sense, perhaps these the sacred geometry is that nature, or the expression of that nature on our plane. We can look at it too, you know, as without, so within. And as without, as an example, we take a look at Kepler's Music of the Spheres, the sacred geometric relationship of the planets. And what we see on the right here, excuse me, the atomic nuclear structure hypothesized by Dr. Robert J. Moon, 1986, where protons are considered to be located at the vertices of a nested structure of 4 of the 5 Platonic solids. So, and this is one model using the Platonic solids. It's also the structured atomic model using the Platonic solids. So, you know, it doesn't have to be this quantum model. In fact, the quantum model's been falsified. Eric Reiter, the thresholdmodel.com, you can look it up. There's a number of people, there's a lot of intellectual ferment around this. You know, a lot of people just accept, well, science figured this out, they smashed these particles, they thought it out, everything's made out of this. But there's a lot of people countering that, so it's really wonderful to see what all the different intellects are thinking. And also etherealmatters.org, that's the structural atomic model where they're developing a model with no neutrons, right? There's just two ways that the electron interacts with the proton, which actually makes a lot more sense in that. But I'd like to actually read a little thing here from the Philosophy of Physical Science by Sir Arthur Eddington. I'll quote, "The question I'm going to raise is, however, how much do we discover and how much do we manufacture by our experiments? When the late Lord Rutherford showed us the atomic nucleus, did he find it or did he make it? It will not affect our admiration of his achievement either way, only we should rather like to know which he did. The question is one that scarcely admits of a definite answer. It turns on a matter of expression, like the question of whether the spectroscope finds or whether it makes the green color which it shows us. But since most people are probably under the impression that Rutherford found the atomic nucleus, I will make myself advocate for the view that he made it. The tendency of writers on quantum theory has been to go farther than I do in emphasizing the physical interference of our experiments with the objects we study. It is said that the experiment puts the atoms of the radiation whose characteristics we measure. I shall call this the Procrustean treatment. Procrustes, you will remember, stretched or chopped down his guest to fit the bed he had constructed. But perhaps you have not heard the rest of the story. He measured them up before they left the next morning and wrote a learned paper on the uniformity of the stature of travelers for the Anthropological Society of Attica. Ends quote. What Edding is saying is we don't know. This subatomic model, is it created by our experiments? Is it really what's in there? There's a lot of people accept stuff, but what Steiner and Ernst Lehrs and stuff called, the self-deception of the discursive mind. So we look at matter's informations, precipitative consciousness in life, and to quote Baron von Herzl, what lives may die, but nothing is created dead. So let's look at stars, panpsychism. This is Greg Matloff's work. So, and his form of panpsychism conceives that the universe is in some sense conscious and that a portion of stellar motion is volitional as an alternative to dark matter. And he raises the concepts in Star Maker, Paula Stapleton's great book. So a universal proto-consciousness field congruent with vacuum fluctuations could interact with molecules via the contribution of the Casimir effect to molecular bonds. Spectral signatures of cooler stars, such as the sun, reveal the presence of simple molecules. Cooler stars move somewhat faster around the galactic center than their hotter sisters. This velocity difference, called Paranago's discontinuity, occurs in the stellar temperature distribution where molecular spectral lines become apparent. Panpsychism can possibly emerge from philosophy to become a subdivision of observational astrophysics. So what he's saying is basically when the stars start manufacturing heavier elements, then they start moving differently, that they start connecting to this proto-consciousness field. And we say, well, is the sun conscious? There's different things, which there's not much scientific papers, but it's been noticed by a lot of observers in the last couple of solar cycles, the Earth facing quiet. The sun's like putting out these big flares, giant, sunspot groups. It turns towards the Earth, they're slowing down. And so there's something, there's evidence that the sun is actually protecting the Earth during this. And then we also have Stuart Hameroff, as professor of anesthesiology and psychology in Tucson. And, he's very much looking at consciousness through these microtubules in the brain, maybe going with, the subfield. So, basically stars aren't nuclear furnaces. That's really a joke of a model because nothing fits the observation, nothing between them. You have people like Professor Pierre-Marie Robitaille, who developed the first high-resolution magnetic resonance imaging stuff, and his Sky Scholar YouTube channel, he's been a series of wonderful videos on the sun as metallic hydrogen, which somewhat merges with the electric universe models. But we could go on. This is a whole other lecture in itself. I just want to put some of these ideas out there. So sun's conscious, we're connected. Alexander Chejevsky, father of heliobiology, sun's effect on biology, founded aeroionization, ionization effects on biology. So he researched the impact of variations of solar activity and dependent geomagnetic oscillations on epidemic diseases, mortality rates, and human mental conditions. Suggested mass changes of mind and populations are triggered by changes in solar magnetism manifesting as upheavals, revolts, wars, and revolutions, as well as events such as epidemics, infestations, and accidents. More than 3/4 of all instances of human unrest, including the Russian Revolution of 1917, had occurred during a solar maximum. Our dependence upon the cosmic pulse of the sun might be mediated by ions or excess changes in the air. So this leads on some very interesting research. Here we have historic statistical solar activity, acts as accelerator and moderator on the whole biosphere. He showed frequency and magnitude of population growth and decline, birth and death rates, harvests, heart attacks, plane crashes, catastrophes. Suicides are all a reaction of the planet to the electromagnetic corona of the sun. And now Krzyzewski, he studied data from 72 countries from 600 BC onwards. But he also, the air ionization, he thought it had something to do with ionization. He found out, I never knew this, I thought I was researching his work, but you can suffocate in a pure oxygen sort of environment if there's not enough negative ionization in it.
Wow.
At least like 1,000 ion per cubic millimeter or something. So if the net concentration of positive ions are too high, you suffocate. So he felt that this really had a lot to do with that, and he invented what we call a Krzyzewski chandelier, right? So there's some interesting little sidelines of this, and this chart here
Can
just
I
shows
ask
all.
you, Thomas, does this
Sure,
correlate?
go ahead.
Does this correlate at all to astrology as well, or is this just the sun and the ionization? I mean, is there any relationship issue aspects or planetary aspects as well?
It has to be directly related.
Okay.
Because even RCA was doing radio astronomy in like the 50s. John, what was his name? I can't think of the guy's name right off. But he did a lot of papers on radio astronomy, really radio astrology, because then they could predict. Of course, they were just heliocentric, pretty much, because they're looking at what effects the planets might have on the sun to create, sunspot activity, things like that, which would create radio propagation, because they had to deal with, the global shortwave broadcast systems. So yeah, they were very much interested in it. And of course, it can be directly tied in. And we'll see some other things as we go along, which will further confirm this line of thought. So yeah, this is just showing that these cycles are there. We don't need to go too much into analyze them because there's more evidence of that. So what we'll look at here is, here we see sort of the relationship of floral and faunal growth to years of sunspot maxima and minima. It's quite interesting to see the inverse relationship between them. This is out of an old book on the sun by a man named Stetson. I've scanned these years ago. I've been looking for the book again. And on the right is actually from George Lakowski's work who developed the multiple wave oscillator, a lot of electrotherapeutic, but he was very much interested in cosmic energies and earth energies. And here they were basically mapping out the qualities of wines against, the fine wines were during the peaks of sunspot maxima. So clearly this stuff's integrated totally into the biological cycles, and human activity. So we're connected in. And this is from the Soviet heliobiology work as outgrowth of Krzyzewski's work. And we'll see upper right, dynamics of morbidity with scarlet fever in Leningrad and curve of solar activity. Well, there you go, viral diseases. So the next one over to the right, more dynamics of morbidity with polio in Japan and varieties of planetary index of magnetic disturbance. So it's not just the solar activity, but it's also its reaction on the Earth, right? And then lower left, number of deaths to cholera, and mean curve of wolf numbers for same year. So wolf numbers is sunspot count. So the sunspot count is naturally related to the solar activity, the flares. And then we see morbidity with scarlet fever in different geographic latitudes. So it depends on where Earth you are, how the energies are coming in. So what's interesting, it's a pretty direct correlation here. Ultraviolet wavelengths are from 10 nanometers to 400 nanometers. So most viruses vary in diameter from 20 nanometers to 400 nanometers. So basically, when the sun's flaring in the extreme ultraviolet, people are getting viruses. And, we got more viruses in our body than bacteria. Viruses are essential to human propagation. The fertilized egg can't stick to the womb wall without a specific retrovirus in the system. And all that junk DNA is virus, ancient virus stuff. Yeah, Professor Louis Villarreal up at the viral department at UC Irvine, he's doing some fantastic work along these lines. But yeah, so what happens is when the flare changes, if our system's out of shape, then potentially, what's in our system changes to a pleomorphic form. So these direct effects of the solar flares on, life and death rates within. And then we have John Eddy, solar astronomer, and he is.
Peter, can I just stop you and go back to that one slide though for a second? Basically, what you're saying, what you're saying is that a plague might not be a plague unless there is the right solar aspect for it. Correct? That's kind of the point you're making.
Well, they basically graft against them. Excuse me. Yeah, that's what, they're all directly tied in. And also what's interesting is tied in, and we'll get into this in a bit, is, we call it economic cycles, but we know they're manipulated too. So somebody's out watching this stuff and somebody knows this stuff, they just won't tell us. John Eddy, solar astronomer, expert in the history of solar processes, right? So in historical times, sun underwent extended periods of missing spots, we call anomalous magnetic respite. The sun during its 11-year cycles affects mental processes, and long-term drastic changes could give rise to even more marked oscillations of mental life on Earth. Bursts of cultural activity in its broadest sense might be expected in independent societies. The strongest changes in cultural history occurred during the so-called Maunder minimum around AD 1645 to 1750, when solar activity was essentially switched off. 1600s to 1700s, it was the age of enlightenment, scientific discoveries leading to our modern world. If we look at this chart here, we see the Sporer minimum was pretty much the Renaissance. So yeah, here we're just pretty much just seeing that, basically the flow of civilization is tied in to, if you want to know about astrology, the whole thing is tied into this. And we're just looking at the sun so far. So we're just going to paint a picture of all these different ideas and go through. And one thing is interesting, see, because when the Sporer minimum, when that started, what we have there was the, the great Renaissance, Galileo, all the discursive sciences are arising. Before that, for like 400 or 500 years before that, they're building all these Gothic cathedrals, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and, and then they start the, this great, rise, we'll call it the Renaissance. And what they do, they start like burning witches, the Inquisition. It's like something wrong. See, so people think about that. The thread that now leads to quantum theory and the belief that that's the fundamental nature includes the witch burnings. People need to consider that in their processes. People are so integrated and believe what science says, and you find this with a lot of researchers that, you have great respect, they'll have great insight into one area, but then they accept every other area as the same rather than like transforming the entire vision. So that's some process we hope to work on here.
We have an inverse relationship between plants and bunnies, right? In the respect that you have a solar maximum, I think, and the plants are really big and the bunnies are really small. So in terms of wars and witch burning, are we reacting to a solar minimum or a solar maximum? What is the most deleterious to us as humanity?
Well, it seems that, the solar maximum was more activity and things, but the solar minimum is sort of when the great, what we call it, ideas arose. But at the same time, those ideas have always been sort of countered in many ways what Steiner called the anti-evolutionary element, which he never really defined. Or at least I've never found the definition because I never read through all his volumes of stuff. I just went through a lot of scientific data. This is actually Ray Tomes, Cycles Research Institute. And we don't have to go through detail of all this because we could take hours on this stuff. And I'm just trying to give the ideas. So different types of radiation vary over sunspot cycle. Continuous stream of radiation, solar wind arrives at Earth. Fluctuations in the stream at Earth affects Earth's geomagnetic field. So Schumann resonance oscillate to 7.5 times per second, which is 7.83, but it's approximately around there. You know, this is how fast electromagnetic waves travel around Earth. So that's the speed of light. If you could run light around Earth, it would make one, it would go 7.83 times, or 7.5 times in 1 second. That's, of course, the speed of light's not really the speed of light. That's the that's a constant. I mean, it's been varied all over, but it's a general constant term for figuring things. It's the speed of the wavefront in terrestrial conditions, so it's a constant. But once the wavefront's established, we've got no way of measuring the speed. And yeah, and we can never measure a ray. It's always group velocity, so there's a few problems with the speed of light thing too. But anyway, in general, speed of the wavefront. So anyway, bursts of solar radiation can get the Schumann resonance really ringing. There are oscillations at near multiples of this, 15, 22.5, 30 hertz, and sometimes lower frequencies. So human brainwave frequencies that are commonly studied over the range from about 0.3 to 40, and the Schumann resonance is right in the middle of that range. The brain is largely an electrical organ. Outside EM fields can affect the brain by entrainment or in other ways. For example, it's known that 10 hertz cycle waves will make human reaction times faster, while 3 cycle waves will slow it down. Accidents are more frequent when there are strong ELF or ultra ULF waves, such as 3 cycles, resulting from a slowing down of human reaction times. People are less able to deal with tripping up or sudden events and more likely to have an accident. I'd actually like to read a quote from Tesla here that I found I like.
Sure.
Just a quote: alpha waves in the human brain are between 6 and 8 hertz. The wave frequency of the human cavity resonates between 6 and 8 hertz. All biological systems operate in the same frequency range. The human brain's alpha waves function in this range, and the electrical resonance of the Earth is between 6 and 8 hertz. Thus, our entire biological system, the brain and the Earth itself, work on the same frequencies. If we can control that resonant system electronically, we can directly control the entire mental system of mankind.
Thomas, Ellen is asking a very pertinent question about that. Is there a way that we can actually protect ourselves from being controlled in this manner?
Well, it's a good question. And a lot of people are working on a wide range. I'd like to think of it in a sort of methodology of Mantak-Chia in the Taoist meditation microscope. He says when you get the microcosmic orbit going and you seal your system up and you awaken like all the inner planets, your astrology no longer affects you. You've now control of your whole spiritual destiny. And maybe, this is the thing. And this is, we look at like the terrain theory versus the germ theory. Terrain theory is the energetic thing changes, the terrain changes. The Soviet heliobiology research on, extreme ultraviolet flaring and viral disease waves show exactly. I mean, people didn't die. Some people got it, some people didn't. What actually is that within our systems that can hold it off? Do we have the power ourselves? And and why were people building big, beautiful temples and things like that, connecting up to all these things? Were they some sort of filters, purifiers? Even more. We'll carry on here. But anyway, there's so much of this information out there. Here we go. One of my favorite guys, Professor Giorgio Picardi. He was one of the chemist of the sun, controversial, significant Italian scientist of the 50s and 60s. So he was the chemistry chair at the University of Florence. And it's interesting, you read up on him and they go, science, orthodox science don't like this. They pick it as statistical analysis. And then they say, but he was a man of impeccable character. He's like one of the finest people you'll ever meet, but we don't trust his data, because it doesn't fit the paradigm. I just love those sorts of approaches. So anyway, he discovered what we call the Picardi effect, in which interplanetary magnetic fields influence the result of simple inorganic reactions and in general results of non-reproducible phenomena. So what he was working with, precipitation of bismuth oxychloride. So basically, bismuth chloride, water, and you get this bismuth oxychloride precipitate colloidal solution. He timed it over a couple decades, 9 years of good data. And what we look at the center chart here, correlation between two different chemical tests, F and D, which is just basically water and then water with the surface tension reduced through mercury bulb technology, which is actually old stuff used for descaling, water heaters and things. So basically we're looking at time across the bottom, solar rotations, and the effects. So the time, because this is in industrial chemistry, right? In pharmaceutical chemistry, sometimes the reactions don't work right? And you have complex reactions, with extremely expensive ingredients, and then all of a sudden, things don't work. How come? So that's what they were investigating, if there was any sort of geocosmic relations, and they did. So they found, basically between solar rotation and geomagnetic and solar days. What we call solar flare days. But also in upper right, correlation between blood sedimentation and chemical test P. So what they found too is that they were basically doing a chicken blood coagulation test while they were doing this. And what they found is that the solar flaring and geomagnetic activity was also affecting the rate of blood coagulation. So what we find here is this stuff is directly affecting our whole biological system. But what's interesting about this is then when they correlated 9 years of data, which is what the chart in the upper right is, basically there was 2 readings. Let me see if I can get my pointer here. So we have here, basically in March and in August, which is 6 months apart, and they basically were looking at. I'm trying to turn my pointer off here. But we, I usually use this on screen, so I'm trying to figure out how, with a pointer up at a screen. So anyway, what he found is that when, in March, so we're looking over at the right, and what we're looking at is our solar system from the perspective of the galactic center. So basically in March, the sun's coming up around and pointing towards Earth. Pointing towards the galactic center, and that's when it's going its fastest in the whole elliptical cycle, because the sun speeds up and slows down as it goes through the ellipse, at least according to that model. So at the greatest drop is when the sun was pointing right towards the galactic center. So what we find is even, not just the solar and geomagnetic activity, but actually our relationship to the galactic center is also affecting these, our biological functions, chemical testing, etc.
Indeed, if you remember Thomas Brophy from Magical Egypt 1, episode 3, he's
coming up later.
Okay. Well, he wants to create a watch, or he was working on a watch that would let you know when the galactic center was becoming active within our world, I guess, because he was so convinced that it had an important effect.
All right, so sidereal time, I track it. I pretty much keep track of where that is at. I'm trying to think of where it's at right about now. It's probably somewhere below the horizon. No, because it circles around every day, and that's the pleroma. It's no black hole there. There's theoretical physicists made up in their discursive trail beneath matter. It's a plasma Z-pinch, as they call it. It's a creative, dynamic plasma, which is happening there. And in other talks I do, we delve more into that, look at the radio maps and things of the galactic center, but that was a little bit off the subject for the stream that we're doing on this one here. So absolutely, it is, and that's what they call it, sidereal time. And some of the remote viewing experiments had names in them. They were finding that certain positions of the galactic center were affecting people's ability to have this distant vision capacity.
Amazing.
So there is a lot to it. And it takes a bit. I've gone through that in the past, tried to figure out how to set up a little timing thing. So if Tom does it, I'll get one. I need it. Anyway, well, move on. I want to bring up Kozyrev. So a lot of people know about Kozyrev from torsion fields and his mirrors, where people would sit inside these circular mirrors at scientists in Russia, and between like 800 kilometers apart, and they could send him an envelope with a symbol, and they'd open it up, and the person in the other symbol would, was able to remote view it. So anyway, Kozyrev, he studied how binary stars evolve. He was one of the top scientists, absolutely brilliant man in the Russian pantheon of scientists. Unfortunately, we never hear much about the really good stuff in the West. They studied how binary stars evolve. They grow to resemble each other more rapidly than can be explained by accepted scientific principles. So he hypothesizes torsion field, a density of time, like scalar energy, which connects cosmic bodies and Earth, creating instantaneous transfer of effects, which will allow them to come into resonance. So claimed to show true positions of stars versus past positions of optical telescopes by torsion balance changes. He said time does not propagate like EM waves, but appears all at once all over the universe. That's why the connection through time must be instantaneous one. So it's possible to observe some phenomena of very far astronomical bodies in real time without delay. This perspective does not contradict the special theory of relativity, because when we have instantaneous connection through time, there are not movements of material objects. So basically, in simple terms, what this little diagram is showing here is they're doing an irreversible experiment, which is just basically a chemical reaction, and it's actually affecting the weight and mass of a disconnected object. They did a lot of this. So he figured that this is the torsion field, as he called it. And I just wanted to introduce the idea here. People can look up the torsion field in the aura. I'm putting the references at the bottom of these. People can rewatch this and go back and look these up themselves. And if they figure out more than me and they think I'm not right and we can expand knowledge or look at ways of doing it, that's what this is all about.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So basically, he was looking at torsion fields of like the sun, and so he would measure they would scan with these reflective mirror torsion field devices he would make. So if we look on the left here, that chart, so the left reading is what he called the position of astronomical in the future. The center is a position of astronomical at the present position, and the right's a position of the astronomical position in the past. So this is based on the thesis that, like, let's say the sun's light takes 8 minutes to get here. So basically, the one on the right, that's what we're seeing, but he's measuring one in the middle and one in the advanced position. I don't agree with his interpretation of this, and I'm actually in some wonderful discussions on this with a friend of mine, Juan, who's a brilliant bioarchitect I work with, who's very much into the torsion fields, and we're looking at different ways of interpreting this. But what's important here is that he's measuring an interesting field, which is not in the regular scientific lexicon. And they're trying to explain it within relativistic physics, but that stuff's all been like through Stephen Crowther's work and others. I mean, that stuff's all been falsified. We need to get past those antique sort of chains that are holding back thought. So this just to introduce the torsion fields. But in the further thing, then we have Vasilyev's work, Sergei Vasilyev. He developed off of Kozyrev's work what he called the long-range action fields. Concept effect, not energy transferred. So true physical process proven by decades of experiments. So its influence of sun, moon, planets, and stars on seismic activity. Influences of the planet Mars and the sun on seismic activity are confirmed statistically reliably in the subregion of the U.S. West Coast and part of Mexico, subregion of Japan. So the sun acts on the seasonal changes of seismic activity essentially differently in different subregions. But also, when we look at this chart here, and this is one of many, and this is a complex subject, so I'm just trying to get some of these ideas out simply to show the effects. This is Mars on the ecliptic over years. And as we know, Mars doesn't go around once a year. It moves along the ecliptic, and I can't remember how many years it takes to go around. And they'll do statistical analysis of seismic activity in different regions, and show that and so this is over multiple years. What years is this? I think I forgot to put the dates in on this. Oh, 73 to 2009.
Yep.
Consistent reading on that. So anyway, This paper can be found, factual data on celestial bodies' influence on seismic activity. What's important here is just that they're measuring these things. There are effects, like when Mars or Saturn, or even they've measured out to Andromeda galaxy, cross the horizon or the meridian, they're measuring instantaneous effects, which they're saying, well, it can't be relativistic. So they're still trying to stay within the relativistic realm of thought, right? But they're saying there's still there's an action field. It's not energy, it's action. So it's their way around it. The point is there's something happening. And then Valery Smirnov, he was at the Research Institute of Hypercomplex Systems in Geometry and Physics, Fryazino, Russia, and Russian Institute of Theoretical and Experimental Biophysics, Russian Academy of Science. So experimental physicist working on accelerator physics. So he was very interested in Kozyrev's work. And Kozyrev had developed these gyroscopic detectors. So Smirnov had actually developed specialized detectors for these torsion fields. And here's one, transit of Venus to the disk of the sun. And it shows the readings that they get, right? There's a drop in the reading on it. So basically, without getting too much into the theoretical or even the mechanics of these things, the point is they're measuring fields that are outside what we call the linear electromagnetic spectrum, which the Western world kind of considers the whole of everything, mere vibrations. Your brain power varies throughout the year, peaking in autumn. This is, again, northern hemisphere, but as we saw, there's different activity in different geological zones. I've lived in the southern hemisphere for the last 24 years, so yeah, I always try to keep my mind open.
Is it still autumn down here, or is it autumn only up in the northern hemisphere and spring here, or is it autumn everywhere?
Well, we're heading into the spring equinox here south of the equator. We just had spring equinox last month.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
So no, we're spring.
But I'm saying the effects. So the effects.
Can't tell anymore. The weather's so screwy.
I know. It's crazy here. But if the effects, if your brain power peaks in autumn in California, does our brain power peak in spring in Queensland?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer. There's a lot of, what are you calling it? There's a lot of data to analyze on this. We're just trying to look at there are variations in it, and yeah, wider range. I just came across September 2018. I just see these little things. I clip them out, throw them in PowerPoint to keep the thought lines going. Cosmic ray variations of solar origin in relation to human physiological state during the December 2006 solar extreme events. That was a paper I came across. And also, too, I wanted to point this out, experimental evidence for variability in Planck's constant. This is another one of these worshipped symbols of modern science, Planck's constant. One of my favorite scientific quotes. Planck, he said, the progression of science, science progresses one funeral at a time, and he's dead, right? And Dr. Robitaille, who I mentioned earlier with this Sky Scholar and his electric hydrogen model, he's shown the non-universality of failure of Kirchhoff's law and non-universality of Planck's constant. I mean, it works for certain things, but it doesn't mean that we're really going into quantum effects beneath that. People take these paradigms too seriously without considering all ramifications surrounding them. So basically, there's a variability of Planck's constant. So how could it be the base of matter? Like we looked earlier at Kepler's music of the spheres, the harmonies of the spheres with the Platonic solids. And I found a paper, I've been looking to find it again, which is actually showing that there's actually a statistical analysis of this at a deep level. There's a lot of truth to that, but it varies off at the edges. And if look, the Schiller Institute published a book years ago, Manual on the Rudiments of Tuning and Registration, where they got into this whole thing where C equals 256 is the basis of everything. It goes up and down. We're in the middle, right? The ground of matter isn't like quantum stuff, right? That's mankind's descent into matter. That's part of the failure of modern consciousness to grasp that we're at the balance between two things. This is where we measure from, is in between, not from some base level and and add up or multiply up or whatever. Not that there isn't anything in these numbers, they're dynamic. They work in physical equations, but not in everything. So we're finding areas where they don't work. And we're finding that they are variable in certain things. And as Rupert Sheldrake's shown, the only reason these things are constants is because they quit measuring them and decided they were constants and told everybody they were, because they're not. So anyway, did you have a question? I saw you pop back up there, Denise.
I was just letting you know I'm hearing you. So it's all good.
Yeah, we'll keep rolling on here. Still got a bit of ground to cover. And we've gone almost an hour, so I will speed it up a bit. Did deadly gamma ray bursts cause mass extinction on Earth, right? We go through these periodic galactic core eruptions, which may have been the cause of extinction level events on Earth. I mean, I'm not one for the steady progression of evolution. There's punctuated equilibria going on there. So we get these basic galactic core eruptions that come through. Paul LaViolette, he was hypothesizing, right, that we're actually in, and he was saying that they maybe even occurred every 13 to 26,000 years, which is interestingly keyed to the precessional cycle, and that they could potentially have something to do with it. But I like John Jenkins brought up, that Oliver Reiser's concept that in proton precession, that the proton precesses at the rate of its distance from the field that's affecting it. So in that sense, we're 26,000 light years from the center of the galaxy, and our precessional rate is 26,000 years. There seems to be something happening to that, but it does seem as though we might be, I agree with Paul LaViolette, that it believes that we're at the beginning of, there is a wave hitting us from the galactic center. It started hitting in the 50s if you look at solar irradiance charts and things, and then it brought in this big happening of solar activity, but now it seems whatever part of the wave is doing, it's starting to dampening it down. So, the sun is controlled from the galactic center and the electric currents. It's an electric universe. This whole nuclear furnace gravity model is nonsense, even though it's taught in academia and many people believe it. But there's a true intellect will examine all sides of the factor, and the intellectual ferment happening within the electric universe fields now is fantastic. So, I mean, what happens? We get, cosmic radiations. Is it going to alter us for good or bad? What really happens with these things? I love these pictures, whoever comes up with these art.
Great, aren't they?
So the Ebner effect, right? In laboratory experiments, Guido Ebner and his associate Heinz Schurch, they were exposing cereal seeds and fish eggs to electrostatic fields. And as they're working for a big Swiss agriculture company. So basically, they were trying to figure out what might happen. Is they're probably looking at it from commercial purposes. And what they found is basically the plants were returning to stronger sort of pre-breeding forms. Both fish, fish were getting characteristics of primitive species that had sort of died out, even though they were derivatives of them. So we get these morphological changes. And, there was, John Burke and Kaj Hallberg's book, Seeds of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, where they were hypothesizing, right, like the Mayans, they called their pyramids maize mountains. So they were hypothesizing that maybe because there was this whole explosion of agriculture and stuff, and weird, I mean, corn, it was like some grass, and all of a sudden it's this agricultural crop, and it's happened all over the world. And there was all these pyramids and things built all over the world, and they do create electrostatic fields. So it's very possible that these were the technology that were used to make the local grasses and things into agricultural crops for the development of civilizations. And we can see in testing that there's no doubt about it that these effects happen. And there's a little thing there from Rex Research if people want to look up more on Ebner and the Ebner effect. It's fantastic, which means that species changes basically probably happen electrically or electrostatically or energetically. But when we talk about space being electric and plasma, it's not just electrons and stuff. We can't keep thinking discursive terms. We call it electroalchemical. It's intelligent. It's forming everything. It's what we derive from. We're anthropic consciousness nodes within this matrix, which is formed by it. So, I mean, that really leaves us.
Sorry,
You
John.
know,
I'm just saying it's just
what
mind-blowing. It really is. It's amazing. Sorry.
oh, that's cool. Oh, so what's science? Yeah, this whole quantum thing. Quantum states are a subsensible mirror of the supersensible metamorphic spiritual processes manifesting in the outer world as animal, plant, and mineral realms. Latter including functional processes of minerals, like say water. Water is not a mineral, it's a mineraloid. It only becomes a mineral when it's crystal. Quite interesting. But in that we have the metamorphoses of clouds too, which are not being disrupted by the electromagnetic nature of mankind's doings. But prior to that, I studied Luke Howard's work, The Metamorphoses of Clouds. He was the guy who came up with, stratus, cumulus, nimbus, and anyway, whatever. So many things going through my mind at the moment. He was a contemporary of Goethe, and they corresponded on that. So really, there's this metamorphic process, and sure, so the quantum states are showing us something, and they're deriving things that they can manufacture, technology which enslaves us and stuff. It's great stuff, and it's also killing everybody in the process, damaging our health. So Goethe, the Metamorphoses of Plants. This is really what I wanted to introduce here. It took a while to get to it. Probably too much info. Metamorphoses of plants is the process by which one and the same organ presents itself to us in manifold forms. It's like humans, animals, we're ensouled. We've got the organs inside us. Plants don't. Plants are a single organ, the plant, that goes through these metamorphic stages. And Goethe would look at, let's say, leaves, like the leaf at the top, that's a common buttercup. And that's actually different parts of the plant have different shaped leaves as the plant develops. So sometimes the plant itself will have the different shaped leaves going up it, or as the plant progresses over time, sometimes through a couple different seasons, the plant leaves will metamorphose, sometimes from simple to complex, sometimes from complex to simple. So there's different forms. So what he would do is he would build these images up in his mind of the plant going back and forth, because what's the plant? You can look at it at any one point and say, that's not the whole of the plant. We can look at a human or an animal, so that's a human in its current state of development, but it's not the same for the plant, because the plant's whole state of development organically is its entire temporal timeline, because the ether is a temporal phenomenon. So he would be able to review this whole plant as an entire temporal structure in his mind in a process what he called exact sensorial fantasy. And Steiner pointed to this as the true usage of the imagination for processing natural phenomena. And this actually then gives one a spiritual view or a higher view of the spiritual nature of what formed living substances and processes on our planet. And this picture on the right is a sketch of Goethe's on the archetypal plant, of all the, well, it wasn't Goethe, but of his concept of there only being one plant. There is only one plant, which is the vegetative surface of the planet. It's a whole, and we need to think this whole. And then we can understand the parts. With science, they're taking the whole thing apart and looking at the DNA inside and starting to manipulate it, and they think that that's where it comes from. But the timing actually comes out of the cosmos itself. And here we see the plant family tree. So here is like the whole of the vegetative surface of the planet as an expression of the earthlons, or archetypal plant as a whole. And we can think in this. It's not discursive. This isn't a soundbite thing. I'm just pointing out where people can go to think about these. There's a book called Man or Matter by Ernst Lehrs. And it's like, well, what's the basis of science? Man, meaning in the old sense, humanity alone. We're not picking on women here, sorry. Any liberals that got hurt on that one, or matter, man or what's the basis of science? Taking matter apart, or understanding our functionality and our position in the universe. So let's look here again. Here's plant life over time, plant data analysis in the fossil records, and basically we can see here Devonian. This is Paleozoic era, Mesozoic, age of dinosaurs, Cenozoic, and we're up at the end. These are the flowering plants here, and these are other plants that started up. Some died down, etc. But the flowering plants didn't really start showing up till the Jurassic era. And of course, that's around the same time that the insects evolved. Insects that were around before that were actually of different types than there are today. And there's this whole plant-insect symbiosis. which the scientists say, well, just what by amazing coincidence, it's all sort of evolved together, but they're intertwined, which is the subject of a larger discussion. But I just wanted to show here, so we can think of the plants as a metamorphoses, the flowering plants coming later. This is, we see leaf evolution, that the whole process of the plants evolving on the planet itself is a larger metamorphic process. And in case anyone thinks that these years, I mean, Permian, 290,000, Carboniferous, 354 million years, like, I don't know about that. Because there was human objects found in, like, the Pennsylvanian coal beds. And there's these out-of-place artifacts all over. So forget about the years. You can believe that if you want. The Hindus use this because to them, humans have been around for hundreds of millions of years. Biblical creationists, this is proof that the Earth is young. I just say it's proof that the standard theory needs some serious revamping.
Indeed.
And this is from a David Attenborough. So this is that plant data analysis put into pictorial form. So we can actually watch the growth of the plant data over time. And this gives us a picture of it as it evolves. So these are all different plant species. Some died out. You can see some are continued on, ferns, etc. And then what we see then is now the flowering plants start coming in. They've colored that differently. And with the data spread, so what you can see is actually the whole evolution of the plant life itself into the flowering plants and their types is almost a plant-like growth, looking at the Goethean process in this larger scale. So thank you, David Attenborough, for that.
That's just amazing, isn't it? It's just perfect.
It is. And then planetary influence upon plants. Well, what is the timing mechanism of plants? Where does this stuff come from? So there's quite a large field of this, which has grown out of biodynamic agriculture. Most of it's in German, very little in English, but I would recommend people get this book who are interested. Planetary influences upon plants. We see at the top, bindweed, basically morning glory. That's Mercury, Sun. The umbellifers, we see the basically Sun, Mars, Jupiter patterns growing with them. Even the dandelion flower is, Sun, Mars, Jupiter. We see this stuff intertwined within. And again, this isn't soundbite stuff. I'm just going to throw a few ideas out here for people to get a larger idea. We look at the monocotyledons. They follow the Sun-Mercury synodical rhythm. And this goes into great depth when one starts understanding it. So I'm just showing the superficial layers here so people can get the idea. And here's one that's a little better known to people. The Venus-Sun synodical rhythms is in the dicotyledons. And we see this. We see it in the apple. We see it in the papaya. You cut them axially. And see them in all sorts of flowers. They're not the only one, but it's the dominant one. And basically looking at 2/5, the way the petioles coming up the stems, looking at the dicotyledons, 2/5 of the shoot circumference is every 144 degrees. So like a spiral every 6 leaf is the synodical period. But then we get more rare 3/8 in some of the crucifers and aconites, snapdragon, plantain. It's actually the sidereal period of Venus. So I say there's quite complexity, and I know there's people who are going to be able to understand this more. I'm throwing this out there in the hopes that people can pick it up, and some 3D animator friends can help, develop this into a way that people can understand it better. These are just things. I'm no expert in any of these. These are the things I'm interested in, and I learned by putting these together and sharing this information. So I'm naturally looking for feedback, and I'm looking for people to understand it better to do things, so I can just sit back and watch it and learn. So here we go. We'll this planetary organism. Flowering plant displays and form interplay planetary worlds surrounding Earth. Yeah, and that's important. This is, as though Earth is the center, is how these things react, because they don't have any intellect. Like trying to screw them up and tell them that, measurements are different than what they experience. This is the experiential world is Earth-centered. Earth around the sun, they can measure it. It makes a lot of sense. But there's different layers of space, and in the anthropocentric space, this is how things function. So the root is the moon, center shoot is the sun and its movement of Mercury, closely tied to the sun. Perianth, which is basically, Venus moving out into the periphery, that's pushing out what we call it the, anyway, stamens and pollination. Won't get too deep into plant biology here. Ovary, Mercury's effect isolated by the moon, fruit development, image of Jupiter oriented towards the zodiac, seed development, isolation of the sun and Mercury's effect by the moon, and the seed is a prerequisite for self-contained plant form, Saturn.
So again, this is a really great example of as above, so below, right? You're looking at a whole planetary organism reflected in the plant.
This is the real thing. And it also, it's not fractal, because, well, everything's fractal. Fractal, everything's fractal. So go, well, no, there's this larger dynamic. You can think of it maybe as a metaphoric type of fractal and its process. But no, this is, the dimensionality of these motions and the way they happen. This is really, no, you're absolutely right. This is the grander scale of as above, so below. It's not a simple thing of just looking at spirals above and spirals below. That was the point I was trying to get. I showed them at the beginning so we could get through that phase. So here's the archetypal plant, and looking at it in the different phases, like the monocots. Let's see, I'll get my little pointer here again. The grasses, predominant influence of the sun interaction with the moon, which causes the lesser leaf activity. Then water lilies, predominance of the moon. Bindweeds, which are the prominent influence of Mercury. And we can think of that, see, because the Mercury overrides the sun, right? Because the bindweeds, they wind around. The leaves actually are more powerful than the stem in the way they do it. And I showed in the picture by the book that their blossoms are actually based on a Sun-Mercury relationship. In this whole thing, right, the sense of form morphology, it's not to follow a botanical system, but the significance of the plants in their natural environment. Like I say, the grasses, they're dominant in where sunlit areas and stuff. And so we go through, but what's interesting with Mercury in the bindweed, the convolvulaceae, there's a lot of tryptophan-derived alkaloids in there, the beta-carbolines, like, harmine, harmaline, and ergolines, like ergobelicine, which is actually like LSD-like derivatives of stuff are found. It was kind of very curious, being Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and you get and the relationships, even at the chemical level in these things. And you'll find too that in herbology, plants related to planets tie in with this whole pattern too. The buttercups, the ranunculaceae, and we've got the simple buttercup, but then most of the buttercups are more complex form like this, which leads to the rose, which is basically what Goethe called the comprehensive manifestation of the type, overall the type of flower. It's like the perfect flower we could think, which is why it's, and it's also in path curve geometry of what we look at is, and the bud of the rose is also tied into the shape of the heart as well. There's a lot. Anyway, we'll get into Jupiter, we're getting into the umbellifers, which actually includes like celeries and things like that. And then outer planets, the compositaes, daisies, sunflowers. Each petal is a flower on these. Those are we either call them compositaes, is a composite flower. So these are whole. So when you look at a sunflower, you're not looking at a single flower. You're looking at every one of those leaves is a flower. So it's quite interesting way of looking at these things. So these just, again, look at the plant world in a different way because they're all connected to the universe. Lawrence Edwards, he discovered that plant buds change form rhythmically, that the rhythms are those of the alignment of the moon with the bodies of the solar system. A specific tree or flower changes the form of its buds in the rhythm of the lunar alignments with a specific body. The oak, for example, appears to change with Mars, the beech with Saturn, the birch with Venus. Edwards' research is the first and only one to have, from first mathematical principles, successfully described any biological form. This implies DNA cannot alone be the propagator of living form, and random processes alone cannot drive evolution. Right? We're already seeing effects of this. So chart on the left, beech bud clearly shows form of a real bud undergoing approximate fortnightly change. It is the rhythm of alignment of the moon with the body of the solar system, in this case, Saturn. Right, alignment of the Earth, Moon, and Mars, and the corresponding change of bud form. So basically, we can see on this little chart, right, during conjunctions and oppositions, Edwards, he was measuring these things for decades. He was over in England. So this, again, anthroposophical research. And budworkshop.co.uk, he wrote a book called The Vortex of Life. So all this information is available for people to go and check out. There's no limits on what you can learn. Baron von Hertzler, not the soil brings forth the plant, but the plant the soil. So, he describes experiments in the origin of inorganic substances. He proved that plants create matter. In seeds sprouting in distilled water, the original content of potash, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, sulfur, nitrogen, and every one of the plant's components increased. It's also shown through fertilization, plants could seemingly transmute phosphorus into sulfur, calcium into phosphorus, magnesium into calcium, carbonic acid into magnesium, nitrogen, oxygen, or nitrogen. And these were all Professor Pierre Berenger, director of the Laboratory École Polytechnique in Paris. He validated this work in agricultural test in 1963, incontestably proved this with leguminous seeds and things. And of course, we do it too within our bodies. We're constantly changing things. Theory of smart plants may explain the evolution of global ecosystems. So easy to think of plants as passive features of their environments, serving as a backdrop for the bustling animal kingdom. But what if the ecosystems of the world take their various forms because plant decisions make them that way? One of the first global theories of land biome evolution, the researchers write that plants may actively behave in ways that not only benefit themselves, but also determine the productivity and composition of their environs. There's a lot of really good research going on now in plant communication. Professor Suzanne Simard up in Vancouver, brilliant work. She's got TED Talk and documentaries and stuff. There's no doubt about it. Plants are highly intelligent. They're just acting differently than us. Plants are capable of complex decision making. And then there's another quote from below, which I quoted earlier, of Hertzler: "What lives may die, but nothing is created dead." That's what science say. First there was nothing, then a bunch of dumb matter blew out of nowhere, and then somehow some scum crawled out and evolved into us. Just by chance, we can think. Ain't we lucky, right? Here, Rudolf Hauschka, a lot of people know his name from the fine cosmetics and stuff they're sold, and because he developed the techniques for preserving the biological processes. He was founder of Walla Pharmaceuticals, and in his Nature of Substance, he duplicated von Hertzler's experiments. So he showed life cannot be interpreted in chemical terms because life results from something which precedes the elements. Matter is the precipitate of life. As Steiner said, the elements of the chemist are the corpses of cosmic processes. So plants can generate matter from a non-material sphere and can again etherealize it. So matter emerges and disappears in rhythmic sequence to lunar cycles. So what Hauschka found is when he's growing sprouts in the distilled water, duplicating von Hertzler's experiments, there was actually there was a general increase, but there was moments on their superfine scales where matter was decreasing, and he was charting it over 12 years. I didn't show all the charts. I'm just showing a basic one. Weight changes the sprouting seeds in a closed system. It's not like the weight goes down below, where it started at the beginning, but in the statistical analysis of the weight, there's spurts and declines. It's quite, spurts obviously being greater than declines. Without going too much into this, and then the nature of matter, the nature of substance, they have potentization curves. So we can take something from the plant, like benzoic acid. You do different homeopathic dilution, then you do biological testing. And the center part is you get what they call potentization curves at the different dilutions. And using synthetic benzoic acid, you get nothing. And there's a distilled water as a test, which shows basically that there's something to life. Hauschka proposed that the vitamins aren't chemicals, but certain chemical structures carry the vitamins, and the vitamins are the ethers themselves. One of my favorite scientists, Jagadish Chandra Bose, the scientist who befriended plants and metals. So Bose, response in the living and non-living. The response phenomena in plants lie intermediate between those in animals and metals. So basically we'd have here's animal, plant, mineral response curves. We have a some animal tissue, got a signal running through it, looking at the oscilloscope screen. You basically drug it with ether or chloroform or some other way of putting some sort of substance into it. You can see exactly where the response curve occurs. This is in plants, but he invented a thing for the Bose. He fathered microwave. He was doing microwave transmissions before Tesla and Marconi were really doing radio. So he invented microwave transmitter receiver, waveguides, horn antennas. This guy, he was way ahead. First semi-conjunction rate, 1899. So he invented this thing called the crescograph for working on the electrical nature of conduction of stimuli in plants, which had been thought of a chemical nature. So that's what he was discovering. And he's getting these anomalous readings, and he started testing the metals. And he found that the metals could be drugged too. So what this shows, living response in all diverse manifestations is only be found in repetition of responses seen in the organic. Nowhere in the entire range of these response phenomena, inclusive as it is of metals, plants, and animals, do we detect any breach of continuity. So the metals, so what we could think of as organic responses is arising in the inorganic levels. As Picardi showed, those levels are being affected. So let's go alchemical thought, right? In alchemy, what did Rudolf Hauschka said? Alchemy is the last fruit of a glorious past, right? As these great wisdom knowledges were declining, we're heading towards what Steiner called mankind's descent into matter in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch. The alchemy was the last attempt to preserve this ancient knowledge and develop it. So if we look at it in that sense, gold in the sun, silver in the moon, iron Mars, Mercury, tin Jupiter, copper Venus, and Saturn lead, there may be more to this than just the primitive idiots say, primitive chemistry. We're lucky that at least they tried because it led us to where we are. So Steiner tasked Lily Kalisko, a brilliant medical doctor, with seeing if there was a scientific method connection between the metals and the planets. So here we have gold in the sun, gold chloride chromatograms. So basically what I showed in the previous picture was, I should have explained it a second. So she'd take blotter paper, so she'd take a gold, basically gold chloride, silver nitrate, lead sulfate, iron, etc. Dissolve it in acid solution, then put blotter paper in, so it would rise contra gravity, so the cosmic forces flowing in would affect its crystallization process. So these are flattened out crystallization. So right here we've got, basically this is a standard sort of gold crystallization pattern that you would see within those. And these are before, during, and after eclipse on June 29th, 1927. So we still see some of the characteristic patterns. We see the disruption within it during, and then it takes a while to really read these. These are scanned plates out of her books. But you can see in these, she did 4 decades of experiments. I'm just showing a couple examples here to give an idea that this is actually happening. Then silver in the moon. So solution of silver nitrate, silver and aqua regia poured into a glass vessel. Okay, we know the process. Silver rises, attaining its maximum state during the day. So link up to here. And then at night, when the sun goes down, it rises up again to here. So no matter how much silver is contained in the vessel, the same thing happens. So, so the second ascent, because moon rolls the night, even though the moon's not always up, it goes through its cycle, but there's something about the moon rolling. When the sun's not in effect, the moon rolls, right? As was the old knowledge. The moon's sphere, not necessarily just the physical moon that we see, but nonetheless, they're connected. So here we have 1936 solar eclipse effects, gold chloride and silver nitrate mixed. So here we are, this is June 8th, so this is the day before, and we get the two of them mixed together, we get this pit. And then the next day, when the exact same solution, when the moon goes in front of the sun, the first gold chloride pictures I showed, we get the nighttime picture arises, showing again that, the moon's rolling when the sun off. So many experiments experiments. I did a video a few years ago, which there's the YouTube link, anybody wants to check it on my YouTube channel, Workings of the Stars and Earthly Substances. And this is lead-Saturn conjunction. Lead basically makes no pattern on its own. So Lilly discovered with silver nitrate and iron sulfate, you could get a certain pattern. Then the addition of lead nitrate gave it this certain characteristic, which we see here. During a major, and again, there's a lot more to it. This is a simple version. You can watch the video for all the plates. When during a major conjunction of the sun, when Saturn is behind the sun, this is what happens. The pattern disappears. So we can see pretty plain the difference. So all this information is available. So, so basically, you know, we've got these connections. And like when Lilly was showing during the solar eclipse with the gold, you know, we get these dark streaks and bent things. And she started thinking, she gave a talk in 1964 called Gold and the Signs of the Times, where she's saying, well, geez, you know, starting in like the mid-1950s, I was getting these dark streaks all the time in the gold. It must crystallize. What can we do? What's causing it? Can we still use this as a homeopathic remedy for, you know, gold is homeopathic for the heart, which they still do, so I figured they, but she's going, what in the world was it? And to me, it was obvious, the electrification of the planet. And also Lawrence Edwards, I was showing his bud shapes and the moon and the outer planets. I want to read something from his book here on one particular bud shape, one tree he was studying. He says, turning away some bewilderment when I suddenly saw what, of course, I'd not really known to the time, but had not the wit to appreciate that this tree was growing only a few yards from an electricity station. A great transformer was humming away on the other side of a fence labeled danger, 33,000 volts. And the high tension cable came into the substation only a few feet above the topmost branches. It was obviously growing in a powerful artificial magnetic field, and the question naturally arose whether such conditions formed a shield which would cut the plant off from the cosmic connections in which it was otherwise enmeshed, which it did. So the plants growing near electric fields didn't exhibit the planetary botany effects of the others. And of course, it's not hard to figure the way this world's going, you know, with this crap electromagnetism, because what Tesla discovered was non-electromagnetic. The longitudinal currents were far different. So they don't fit the electromagnetic spectrum. And I deal with this in other talks on Goethe's theory of color and Tesla physics. But basically, you know, science experiments find plants won't grow near Wi-Fi. Radiation from Wi-Fi affects the blood heart. To me, it's sort of like that old movie Poltergeist, right? We got these electric lines running everywhere, basically pumping lower astral crap, you know, it's electromagnetic rubbish out of the ethers. And what's seeing in the whole world looking at porn? I mean, what's the web? But of course, CERN, they've got priority over it. But then the second biggest thing is porn. Then it's ads, and actually find good information. That's like, you know, minor percentage. Ocean acidification via electromagnetic ionization. Dung beetles use stars in the night sky to navigate. The old symbol of the Egyptians there. Magnetoreception. So we've got them. I mean, I've always been able to sense north, at least more so when I was younger. I always felt, even blindfolded, I could be spun around and find directions when I stopped being dizzy. Sharks have them. It's all over, but we're screwing up with this whole electrification of the planet. Basically cutting ourselves off. And of course, CERN's no help. CERN itself is basically based on Earth-Moon geometry. These guys are not stupid. There's something bigger going on there than just trying to find little tiny particles. It's basically based, as Joseph Patrick Farrell has shown in his amazing work, that this is basically Nazi belt technology, and it's basically connected back through to secret projects and Nazi belt technology of the Second World War. And of course, they've got priority over CERN, over the internet, because they developed it. But the fact that they're actually using this Earth-Moon geometry within it, which was used by many ancients, and it's also on a ley line, as Scott Onstott's shown in his work, which is, I put his website up there, Secrets in Plain Sight, where I've taken this from. And I did a search up in the upper right corner. If you look, Apollyon, Switzerland, right? Because what do you get? CERN Recruitment Office. It's an old temple to Apollyon, who is the deepest, who is the basically the demon of the deepest the bottomless pit of revelations. And here we see this little cartoon here. I love these things. From John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, basically Christian fighting Apollyon to drive him off. Good always wins over evil, we hope, right? And here's what we can see is BP Earthwatch. For a while, he was really watching this. Every time they fire up CERN, it would warp Earth's magnetopause. A lot of detailed information on this. So what's going on? People say, well, it doesn't have enough power, but who knows what sort of fields are connecting through these geometries and connections. There's so much more to this. So, I mean, really, science, what in the world is science these days? It's, is it just chemistry? Is it the corpses of, materials of cosmic processes? People are just dealing with atoms. Everything's made this. We're going to, magnify Planck up, and people are lost on these things. And some brilliant researchers are, I won't call them lost. I just feel that their perspectives aren't fully comprehensive of the other side of things at this point. So, I mean, and that's what's been beautiful about this whole magical Egypt thing that you've been doing. I've been listening to all these researchers, and a few of them, they do ping on to these these quantum sort of things, but that's natural. I still use this. They're useful metaphors, but they shouldn't be considered foundational absolutes. That's, I believe, where the error comes in. But the point is the merging of art and science and all the brilliant information that's come out so far, through all the work that you and Venice and Chance have done. So basically, I've developed a whole thesis out of this between what I call the chronarchy versus organic time. The chronarchy is this electrical system, the timing, and we need to get back to the organic time, that which connects us, that'll allow the gold to crystallize properly again, because, where's our gold? In our heart, in our systems. So I just like making these slides for talks. And we were talking about before the Renaissance, right? The Gothic cathedrals, the Virgin Mary, this feminine impulse was coming in. And I got this out of Louis the Carpenter's book, Louis Charpentier, which I read when I was a teenager. It's puzzled me my whole life, and this may have been one of the seminal clicks in my mind that drove me in this direction, was that the cathedrals of Notre Dame cathedrals of northern France are laid out on the landscape in the pattern of the constellation of Virgo. And when the Catholic Church went in, of course, what was the Black Mass? The Black Mass was the tantric rituals that were performed on the altars to connect heaven and earth. Obviously, these things weren't built just to some mumbo jumbo and feed people bread and get their money. These are giant cosmic things connecting heaven and earth, and they were made for tantric rituals. So that's what the Black Mass that the church was trying to stop. They made it all sound evil and satanic, but it was obviously not. And of course, the labyrinth at Chartres, the Catholic Church destroyed the labyrinths in a number of them, but they left that one alone, which is the yoni of the Virgin. So I'm sure people still use this, although we'll never get in there probably for that purpose. But these connections to the heavens, what's the point of these things? And here, Chaco Canyon, what a fantastic place. I've done a couple of expeditions there in the past. But I knew about archaeoastronomy to a certain extent, but I didn't know. I mean, it's an 18.6-year lunar cycle. And but then they've also used advanced geometry to build monuments. So we're looking here at, Pueblo Bonito, which is the center of time. Equinoxes and solstices, all sacred geometric relationship. And nobody really lived in these places. Even the rubbish mounds out front are fake. They're built to look like rubbish mounds, right? But analysis of them is they're not going now. And this thing's fantastic. And it measures the whole complex over a dozen major houses in and around the valley and other outliers. Complex, 100 million cut sandstone blocks in the valley and 250,000 trees with perfectly cut ends. They don't know where it came from. You go to the interpretive center, they got scrawny Indians and loincloths dragging rocks and grinding the ends off of things. And you look at, this stuff was built at the same time as the Gothic cathedrals. And they got the 18.6-year lunar cycle built into them. So they go, well, it's a calendar, so they knew when to plant corn. They would have starved before they figured this one out. So, yeah, why were they doing this? This is extremely important to them. And that's magnificent, but let's go here not to apply it. You brought up Tom Brophy earlier, and we've discussed this whole Noptoplaya, these rude stones stuck in the desert. But what do they measure? They measure the precessional cycle of Orion. You know, basically the two positions over, you know, the half cycle, you know, basically 12,000 plus years, which is pretty amazing. But what I found that's amazing. But the most amazing thing to me is really these sighting circles, which are south of here, which measure the heliacal rising at the vernal equinox. You know, we're looking 6,500 BC, 5,000, 6,000 BC, but that they also measure the distance to the stars. This, when I heard that magical, that was one of the highlights of magical Egypt, of all amazing stuff in there. This still blows me away. And of course, they could. You say, well, they could have dowsed it and all that. And yeah, well, probably they did. Or maybe they were in a state of consciousness and they just walked out and knew where they were. We don't know what state of consciousness. But what I find fascinating is this incongruity between the fineness of the information and just these rude stones stuck in the ground. It's like they really need to get them there for something. They were doing something. This is technology. We don't know. I even with all I've gone around this, I'm not really sure. Unless they were using them for travel, for connections, communications of these higher beings. But Steiner said knowledge came from the stars. It's not like the zodiac was, you know, drunk shepherds at night doodling, you know, in their minds looking at the stars, because we got commonality all over the world. We look at Greg Matlow's stuff. We start out with the panpsychism. Stars are intelligent, can move on their own potentially. And there's been theories that basically the zodiac formed itself as a systems logic step-down transformer of these higher knowledge. And Paul Violet gets into that a bit, talking about, yeah, I think he still looks at the interpretation model, but that, you know, the stinger of Scorpio and the arrow of Sagittarius are pointing directly at the galactic center, which is where these super waves come out of, which transform things. So there's a higher knowledge to all this. And it even goes back, Lascaux. You know, here's basically equinox and solstice markers. So if you're standing in Lascaux looking at this, these are precise. And what basically here, a handful of researchers witnessed the solstice light the first time. The original thing, okay, it only would have been bright enough to work for about an hour for several days each year. There's no soot on the ceiling. They weren't in there with torches doing all this painting. But this stuff's, and there's all sorts of zodiacs and stuff around in these caves. And I forget the woman's name. I'm sorry I did. I meant to write down for this because it's a long, complex name. Is ancient astronomy, and I can find it maybe in the discussions and give this to people, is that the caves that are painted, there's a lot of caves around that area, you know, southern France, northern Spain. The caves that have paintings are oriented towards the equinox or sunrise and sunset solstices. And the ones that don't have those orientations don't have any paintings inside. So, and there's a lot of them. So we're going back 15 to 30,000 years on this stuff. So this isn't anything new either.
So could it be to, you know, like if you look at the Bible, they say to build heaven on earth, and Arthur Versluis is saying it's to rectify the earth, the material, and have it balance with the non-material. I mean, could it be a balancing act or a rectifying act of some sort to build these standing stones, or these little Nabtoplaya stones, or these big Mahirajaro, complexes?
Yeah, it might be. Well, the building could be integrated into our consciousness themselves. My good friend Jerry Vassalanos, one of the most brilliant researchers I ever worked with, who's basically gone into sort of what we call recluse mode 20 years ago. But he did a video series called The Ray of Discovery, and then he published the Vril Compendiums, which I published at Borderlands. His whole thesis, and he was quite well, I say, one of the most brilliant people I ever met. And that there's a good pantheon to pull from there. But he was helping ray of discovery that the Earth herself basically throws these ideas into inventors' minds to create. And he showed that the development of technologies actually followed geological lines and mineral lines and things across the world. And then in the process, then basically then electrical lines, telegraph lines, electrical lines, they were built up, and then the things started following those, right? Because we were creating artificial ones. And so basically, when we're in balance between Earth and sky, perhaps these things were being built. And we look at the Star Maker, Oliver Stapleton's book. I don't know if you've ever read that. I recommend everybody read that at least once in their life. You're really missing it if you haven't. But he was basically, it's a union of all worlds, this whole development of galactic consciousness. And he basically, but I was thinking, well, maybe people needed some sort, they were all doing it in the mental realm, the telepathic realm, but maybe some of the development is, this might be, you might be able to travel on these alignments. Not in the physical body, but Jerry told me that he would do meditations at night. He would connect himself radionically to the Earth and stare at different stars. And he would connect to one star optically. And we used to have long discussions about starlight being instantaneous, none of this speed of light stuff through space. And that's a whole another long argument that we've had a lot. And I got that stuff through NASA myself originally. And I've talked to astronauts who countered it, and my NASA contacts said, well, he's a trained observer, and he's reporting exactly what he saw. He said, but the information we gave you was correct. You can't see the stars optically without any special stuff in space. They had to develop special things. But so anyway, but in these discussions, which we were doing back at Borderlands back in the 80s and stuff, and looking at Tesla transmission, stellar light's longitudinal transmission. So we look at the sun dot is instant. That's real time. There is no transmission time. It's like Tesla longitudinal electricity. The blue stuff probably takes 8 minutes, and then of course all the particulate stuff takes longer. But then, and then we're looking at long range action fields. We know that there are instantaneous effects from distant bodies that have been measured in a number of detectors and geophysical experimentations. So yeah, we get that. Anyway, I'm forgetting. These trails go odd. But what Jerry was telling me was that he'd go to these other planets. And when he would, he said he'd see the whole timelines of civilizations rising and falling. And he'd insert himself in at different lines. And he'd actually encounter people and talk to them. And he said that he believed that when the people that he met on these other planets, they actually experienced him coming in as a UFO because he felt these lenticular shaped craft following energy things coming around him as he was transcending into their level. See, so then you look, I used to have a poster of all the different types of UFOs. We've seen 100 different types and stuff. So maybe this is the real thing rather than the carcass in a tin can where you got, get your carcass in a fancy tin can and catapult it across this empty space. Well, space might not be empty and it might not be anything people think of because they're lost in this 3D consciousness, rather than the projective geometric consciousness that Steiner pointed out was the higher order function of space, which then is what works anthropocentrically around the planet through cosmological botany. That's projective geometry, not 3D Euclidean matter, quantum effect type stuff, right? We're out of that realm when we're dealing with these things. So I'm getting talked out, so we're going to have to... Reader may want to know why the ancients thought they could go to heaven only on 2 solstical days. Because in order to change trains comfortably, the constellations that serve as gates to the Milky Way must stand upon the Earth, meaning they must rise heliacally, either at the equinoxes or the solstices. The galaxy is a very broad highway, but even so, there must have been some bitter millennia when neither gate was directly available any longer, one hanging in midair, the other having turned into a submarine entrance. And this is why, well, it's all about when Christ's second coming. Well, what's Christ's second coming? Is Orion rising in the because we're at the end of the precessional cycle now. We're at Sun's conjuncting the galactic center. Orion's at the top. Handshake position with the sun. So here's some of the first alignments. The 2012 era, 2012 we'll call it. Galactic alignment was lunar eclipse. December 22nd, and we look at Orion then. The moon's almost there, but it's obviously in the range. But then we look at the galactic alignment solar eclipse, June 21st, solstice 2001. And where's the sun? Lying perfectly galactic center, the handshake position of the sun. This is basically, this is Christ rising right now. It's happening. The second coming is happening now, but everybody's lost in the electrical maze. It's been created through this false paradigm. Kind of what the Dark Journalist has been doing a wonderful series. Nobody's ever seen his stuff. Daniel List, another beautiful rabbit hole to go down. The eighth sphere that Steiner warned about, that Ariman's trying to create to trap souls into. This is the matrix. And you were asking about astrology, right? Well, tropical astrology, which is the matrix, or sidereal astrology, which is our true transpersonal connection to reconnect to the stars. You know, you can use both because they're both effective, but which one do you want to follow in the long run? Let me see. And then the center picture is from Adrian Gilbert, another brilliant researcher, opening the Stargate. So this was his interpretation. I got a lot of good, rich material from reading his books. It says June 29th, 2000, Orion is Alpha and Omega. And this was between those two other alignments I just showed. So he's pulling this as something from the Book of Revelation. And, you know, Orion is seen looking up the north face of Great Pyramid, AD 2000. That's from Mark Bidler's book I call The Most Ignored Book in Archaeoastronomy, The Star Mirror, from back in the 90s, which Gary David turned me on to, thankfully, where he's showing that all these ancient alignments with these different places around the world, that the big mountains nearby are related through these geometric relation triangles, and that they're related in this way to the stars. And that right now, between 2000 and 2100, all those stars are aligning with the highest mountains on Earth, which are also closest to the ancient sites that are related. It's a complex thing. But you should track him down and have a chat with him sometime, because I've never been fully, I understand what he's getting at, but I haven't been able to put the thing into soundbite where
Sure.
I can explain it yet.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a lot to
How
it.
you
And
doing? Do you need a break? Are you good?
Oh, no, we're getting, yeah, might as well. We'll just roll. We'll take a break so I can stamp and stretch, and then we'll maybe do some questions, answers, discussion if you want, however you want to go. Sacred Geometry of the June 21st, 2000, or 2020. So this is coming up. I found this on Graham Hancock's site. So there's the link down at the bottom. You can find a bit more. So this is a big one. It starts kind of at Stonehenge and goes across Asia. So pyramids, Kailash, Stonehenge, everything. So we're still in this era of these alignments. I mean, what does it all mean? What does it have to do? And well, here's another picture of that alignment. St. Christopher carrying Christ child across the river. Here's a pure reflection of Orion in the handshake position, right? Because how is this stuff reflected in art and consciousness as we go through? So look at Samuel Putman. He said, the great art of each age has been the accurate reflection of the rhythm of that age, while the greatest art is always that which is in accord with the rhythm of absolute time, of the universal. And I always loved Turner's work, right, because he was into Goethe's theory and expressed it all so well. I feel he really caught that higher sense of the interplay of light and darkness. His Snowstorm Steamboat off a Harbor's Mouth, beautiful painting. But then Aristotle said the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. So yeah, when I was young, my dad, he was a professor, he was chair of the economics, chair of the College of Commerce down at DePaul University in downtown Chicago. So that was, so I grew up in that environment. And he had a post office over here, a couple blocks away. We'd walk over there. I used to love it. It's what a magnificent building. That was one of the highlights when I was a kid. I wanted to go to the post office with my dad. It's just absolutely amazing. It was a gem of the true Masonic arts. It's vaulted dome, fluted pillars, marble floors, organic shapes of true architecture. So yeah, in the 60s, they tore it down. They put this crap up. Mies van der Rohe told, oh yeah, it's just a study in geometric perfection. It's a fucking box. Excuse my French. And then they put up this calder, and they call it art. I don't know. I mean, to me, the thing, that calder looked more like, I thought what the city would look like after a nuclear explosion, wreckage. So yeah, it's called a flamingo, but yeah, maybe it's hiding its head because of the ugliness it was starting to, but was called a good art? Was it bad art? Did he actually catch the zeitgeist at the time? This was a changeover. This was actually the federal takeover of the states happened, and people didn't notice this because people were asleep and they were being fooled by the papers and everything. So this is when the common law states like Illinois and California were changed to the federal zones like IL 60666 and CA 95589. Like people don't know zip code. Put your zip code on the mail. Zip the mail. Go look the zip code up. You know what the zip code is? It's the zoning improvement plan for federal employees. It's voluntary. It's only it's used. This stuff runs deep. But anyway, but this all happened, and they were tearing down the old stuff. So what level of the universe was this stuff actually functioning at? It really has to make you wonder. Is this anyway? I think Calder's art is probably good and bad art. It's good art because it was catching a bit of the time. It's bad art because times are degenerating. So these understand. It begs for a new impulse. Understanding the true nature of art, the nature of space, and ourselves at the same time. We're not insignificant. People say, "Oh yeah, we're so insignificant." I go, "To who?" And they go, "Oh, the big picture." I go, "We have big pictures in your head, right? Who are you really insignificant to? The elite that taught you that picture? That's don't be fooled. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right? We're centers of our own biological universes. When we die, we pass into the Bardo realms. What do we take with us? Some model that the scientists tried to convince us out of some experiments that we never actually saw and was only their interpretation, or our experiential reality.
Exactly.
That's,
yeah.
So thus we are unable to envisage, paralleling the historic evolution of the mind of man, succession of the different phases of the spatial problem in art, a succession which we may divide into three stages. First, the empiric period, from prehistoric times down to the Italian Renaissance. The second, the optic or rationalistic period, from the Renaissance to the advent of Cubism. And third, the synthetic or spiritual period, from Cubism on. Well, the empiric period, we know that there was, obviously, from anybody's been found magic Egypt knows there's a far deeper thing to this. He's speaking in a general term from a general understanding of Western history and stuff, and what would have been known about the general stuff about the art at the time. I put the picture of Thoth in there because I like this relationship to the Kandinsky and the flow.
Yes.
But even if we don't agree with it, and this is from Leopold Servage's ideas on spatial problem and painting. This from Samuel Putnam's book, The Glistening Bridge, which can be downloaded at the Center for Visual Music. Oh, excuse me.
Bless you, darling.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse me for 1 second. I need to blow my nose.
Guys, I hope you're enjoying this. This is pretty amazing. Very thorough presentation.
Yeah, no. I just got back from China, and I must have caught a little bit of a cold on the plane, which I really get that. But anyway, thank you for putting up with me. Okay, so let's think of this. Even if he's not thoroughly accurate in these three phases, because the empiric phase would be much more complex, and we know that there's a lot happening. But definitely, he caught the what we call the optic or rationalistic period, the Renaissance. That's for sure, and we can see that was tied in directly with solar cycles. And then we got the the synthetic or spiritual period from Cubism on. And of course, we see at the beginning of that, these people, they were trying. Kandinsky, he was trying to create a language of art and of basically shape and what we call shape and color that was basically, express the artist's inner necessity, communicate universal emotions, ideas, spirituality, like musicians do. He was trying to create this parallel with that. So, and he was into anthroposophy too. So, even though it wasn't overt in his stuff, and he said, of all the arts, abstract painting is the most difficult. It demands that you know how to draw well, that you have a heightened sensitivity for composition and for colors, and that you be a true poet. The last is just the beginning of non-objective arts. And I also want to mention too this Van Gogh painting, Starry Night. He painted that when he was at his most mentally disturbed after he cut his ear off, right? He's in a mental institution, right? And what they found out is these scientists actually found out through studying this and doing computer analysis of the highlights that Eddie's matched what they call the Kolmogorov statistical model of turbulence, that he was actually seeing this, even though for laymen, turbulence is generally considered the last unsolved mystery of classical physics. So it's very possible that his mind, worked by the so-called psychotic state. He was seeing this higher thing. But it's fine art. So where does this artistic impulse come from? What was Kandinsky trying to get into? What were the Egyptians doing? I mean, I'm blown away by the information that Chance and everybody else has brought out in these series, this latest series on the parts of the brain, and I'm still fathoming all that. There's so much to take in. And then here again from the Glistening Bridge, space then is the rhythm of our age. The space version superseding the woman version of the Renaissance and nearest akin to the matter version of the 11th and 12th centuries. In this recapture of rhythm, we find ourselves in accord with the religious tradition not only of the Middle Ages, but of the East. Our joint heritage is found to be rhythm and space, the later bequeathed us by the Renaissance, the picture having stepped down from the rhythmic wall, space having become the entity that has to be domptated. Domptated is an obscure word which basically means to be tamed. So according to Servet, all the non-objective art is an attempt to paint what he calls the virgin of space, the rhythm of our time. You reflect in the awakening, the new understanding of space and time in the conventional world. So basically, we need to evolve our space. So now obviously, space, as we've seen from Notre Dame cathedrals, is the Virgin Mary. The Black Goddess of space, the Mother, whose womb is the center of the galaxy, the pleroma, not a black hole, but we could say generative plasma, which gives birth to higher life. The realm of the aeons, the Aeon Sophia, who created us. And that's what 2012 was, right? The December solstice going through. These connections are happening. So much to it. I'm going to keep on rolling here. But then what happened? Modern art was the CIA. Wait a minute. I thought this objective art was this new spiritual phase. It got hijacked pretty quick. For decades in art circles, either rumor or a joke, but it is now confirmed as a fact. The Central Intelligence Agency used modern art, including the works of artists such as Jackson Pollock, Robert Motherwell, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko, as a weapon in the Cold War in the manner of a Renaissance prince, except that it acted secretly. The CIA fostered and promoted American abstract painting around the world for more than 20 years. As we know, CIA is just a tool of the elite who created them. It goes back, I found this wonderful article years ago, Money, Power, and Modern Art by Henry C.K. Leo, a merchant banker in New York. And there's the web page. I would highly recommend reading this. He gets into the whole formation of the Federal Reserve and all that, and how the women in the families were like supporting the artists and all that. And they manipulated art. So exact same people that stopped Tesla, stopped all the higher technology, put this form of modern art. They stopped all the organic processes of this development and promoted that, which they liked. I mean, sure, Jackson Pollock, I wish I had one. I'd sell it for $40 million and fund all my friends' projects, because some idiot would buy it. But look at these paintings. I mean, de Kooning and Motherwell. I mean, can you call this art?
I'm
It's
with you.
design.
Yeah.
It's design. And I mean, I like some of that stuff, and I mean, I was sort of raised liking it. I like surrealism, but obviously, there's a lot more to it. So,
But in terms of
so
lifting you up, in terms of reflecting the underlying theme of our time, unless our time is this big messy blotch, which it very well could be.
right, there is a mixture. I mean, let's just say it's a good art or bad art or both. There's a bit of both in there. I mean, in some ways, I actually like this stuff. I mean, it's really cool in a sense. I like the abstract, outre sort of far out world. Hang on, I missed the beatnik world, but I got the hippie one. Not that really was, but anyway, people think the artist because he got long hair. So anyway, we see the manipulation. So where does that really take us? Is come to understand that great core within you, like the very axis around which the stars turn. And I don't know if you noticed that, but the stars have been turning around these pictures all the way through. So in my sense, everybody takes it in their different way. Some people latch on to the science or particular strains of things, and they do it. So, and me, my representation of the higher field and what we call the imaginal realm or the connection basically came through the Vajrayana in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I was talking about, when I was a teenager, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But I really liked it. Basically, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we meet what we call the Buddhas, right? The Dhyani Buddhas, which aren't really Buddhas. They're aspects of consciousness, form, perception, cognition, volition, and total consciousness all together. And these are representative of wisdoms. And that's what the mandala meditation is, basically visualizing this thing as a complex thing. So, I mean, but for me, I had to merge all the systems. I was trying to synthesize them. So I took Steiner's etheric sciences, which had very real basis in things. I worked with Trevor Constable, the weather engineer. We were engineering large-scale weather changes using tiny geometric devices based on etheric technology. And Goethe's theory of color. So this is my reformation of the Vajrayana mandala for my own. And of course, I had to turn it around because I'm in the Southern Hemisphere, because of that. So basically, so the Sambhogakaya, the middle realm, body of limitless form. So the sectors are like land or Buddha fields. And so we've got the Dharmakaya, which is the absolute, everything comes from. That's like the pleroma. Then there's the Nirmanakaya, that's sort of the physical body, but really only when it's in touch with the illumined nature of that which projects onto this plane, like we say sacred geometry or something like coming out of the Platonic realm or something. And then the Sambhogakaya, that's this intermediate realm, the Bardo, in essence. So in the center of this, then, right, we have this. So the mandalas are more like metaphysical bullet points. Yantras are sort of like radionic devices. This is sort of an extension of both, which is Goethe's theory of color and the mandala unfolding into everything. But then I put this in because out of this then, get Robleski and his art alphabet. He was a theosophist. This came out in probably the 30s. And this is again seminal in some formative years, he developed this language of art based on reading nature. So basically, if we look at where the basis, so this is what I've been working is trying to develop a language of art, which comes out of all of this. Because in art, where do we see things? So let's say, here's the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right? Here's the peaceful deities. So basically, this is the mandala, right? You see the same pattern. So here's the center, Varochana, Akshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, and Amoga Siddhi, right? So the four. So basically, you got the five. Whatever the attendant ones are around, that doesn't really matter. You're looking at the pure form here. You see it. That's what it is. And so this is art. It's not religious art in the Western sense, where you're looking at something to be pious or this is a map. This is the map of the Bardos. This is telling you, you remember this one, you're going to figure your way through. And this is then the wrathful deities. And again, here you got, Varrocha in this form. They've got given different names in these forms. And there's the basic 5 around. So basically, what the peaceful deities are is the mandala acting out of the heart chakra in our interactions with reality and people. And that's what the karmic path is, and we got to deal with these in the ungrounded state because these are the imprints. And then the crown chakra is, the wrathful deities, the mandala functioning through that. And when I showed that 6-pointed star there, that is, with the full color thing, because I always say in this, when you're going through the Bardos, well, if you didn't get it and you connect the wisdom in this one and you're moving on to the next element, I say, well, take refuge in the rainbow heart of the Buddha. But the rainbow heart of the Buddha is basically that 6-pointed star, if you study the Anahata chakra in that sense. So this is sort of art, science, because then, like I say, Goethe's theory, color, atmosphere, color formation, Tesla waves, they all archetype. So, I mean, I just really like working with archetypes and symbols. And one of the earliest, and I like this quote from Alejandro Jodorowsky: "Words are not the truth. They indicate the way to go, but you need to go alone, in silence. Symbols have a language that surpasses the words." It's one of the early practices I did when I was a teenager. Got it out of probably Butler's Apprentice to Magic, that I've seen in other places since then, was the tattva visions, where you meditate on the tattvas, or the elements, which is basically the Kali Yoni is the 16 tattvas here: earth, water, from upper left going down counterclockwise, earth, water of earth, air of earth, fire of earth, earth of water, like this. And these are the 16 court cards of the tarot as well. Those are these same elements, or the kalas, or emanations of Kali, which is where the calendar comes from. So this is the calendar of now, right? The etheric weaving of which biological time spirals along on. And the center diagram is one of my symbolic solutions to Steiner's ethers in artistic form. So the red is the warmth ether, the blue is the tone ether pulling in those, and then we have what looks like the compass and square. That's the life ether, which is rooted to the most densest form, our skeleton. And even we look at Reich's Bion experiments and stuff will give us an understanding of that. And then the optical, which can transcend all of those, and comes down. And curiously enough, this just popped in my head one day. And there we have basically the compass and square.
I know.
As a fundamental of energetic formation in consciousness coming out of these archetypal realms. So the Yoni of Kali, that's the past, and giving birth out of it is the future. So, I mean, if we look at what Kandinsky was going, right, he's saying, basically turn from nature, go purely with the form. But I believe if we can get into Goethe's theory of metamorphoses of plants, that we can continue to bring these natural processes in and combine this whole sense of things. And so here we are at the beginning. This is some visionary art by my friend Nemo, Papa Legba opening the gate, but Papa Legba is none other than the Christ returning. It's just different archetypes from different religions. Love this, getting off the cross of matter, which we can call the Nirmanakaya, right? Which is, and we're in this awakened heart, mind, body, which is the Sambhogakaya, right? Stepping through into the Dharmakaya, realizing, so we can actually see those forms of enlightenment in reality around us, because they're all functioning here right now. That was the sixth patriarch, Huey Nang, right? We're all already enlightened. We just don't notice it, right? We got to understand how these things are. So it's all here. We just need this manner of orientation. And this symbol, basically, we could call this the Era 2012 symbol, the sun being reborn into the new age coming through. So anyway,
beautiful.
So hopefully this will begin a new phase for people. And thank you for giving me the time, Denise.
This is amazing, Thomas. Really, I mean, just absolutely, completely mind-blowing. And I appreciate you taking the time and really, really going through all of this with us. So thank you so much. I'm going to post this on YouTube too for anybody that missed the whole thing. But I'll just see if there's any questions at all. Oh, do you want a break, sweetie?
We'll see if there's any questions. I don't mind. Maybe we'll take 15, 20 minutes of questions, and I'm going to give up and go eat.
Yes,
I'm amazed my voice. I was losing my voice, but it came back, so I'm okay.
Okay,
I can do this. I don't care. There's so many trails that this could go off on. I mean, these are like stratifications. You can go and study the fossils at the different layers and stuff. So I was trying to give an overview.
I know, it's amazing. Look, we'll have you back, and we'll start going down some of these rabbit holes, because there is just so much information here. I think it's going to take me a while to digest just this. My friend Truth Seeker wants to know, have you read The Lost Star of Myth and Time by Walter Grutenden, and do you agree with his theory that we are in a solar binary with two suns, the other sun being the star Sirius, and their movements causing heightened states of consciousness to humans on Earth?
Absolutely. That was one of the slides I pulled out. I mean, that whole section on the alignments and all that, I had a number of other animated slides. No, that's totally tied in, with the Sirius cycle. Wonderful book. I really like Walter's work. There's a lot to that. So, yeah.
Yes.
That's integral to understanding this. So, I had too many slides. I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of these slides. It's like, how do you do them, and how do you keep a consistent story and not get lost, and just try to keep it in soundbite reality, because it's a slide.
I know, it's true. It's true. Look, I know Chance can't wait to get his hands on with you and some of your slides, and really kind of take some time, because there's just so much important information here. But luckily, I think we have completely confounded everybody, because we don't have any more questions at this point, darling. So I'm going to let you go, let you eat, post this on Facebook and YouTube, and say thank you. Thank you so much, darling.
Oh, no, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And deadlines are wonderful. Give me another one sometime.
I absolutely will, darling. That's a deal. Well, we're coming to see you, to shoot you in November. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And I thought, well, actually, I'll do this talk live when you come up here.
That's a deal. Oh, that's a deal.
New Earth Haven venue here.
I can't wait. It looks gorgeous. I was looking at those rooms that you sent me. They look amazing. I can't wait to come out. I need a holiday, so this is going to be great. A working holiday.
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Venice. You have a wonderful day there.
You too, darling. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.